Hey guys, Michael here from Ford Truck Enthusiasts, the Mustang source and Mustang forums. I'm down in Oceanside, California today at Magnaflow headquarters. Today we're checking out the brand new X-Mod and competition exhaust systems for the 2024 Mustang GT. Here we are inside Magnaflow's Research and Development Center, getting ready to learn about and test the new 2024 Mustang GT exhaust systems. But first, a little context. The standard 2024 Mustang GT features a dual-tip exhaust with 480 crank horsepower. Upgrade to the active valve exhaust for $1,225, and you get quad tips, an extra 6 horsepower, and 4 different sound volumes, quiet, normal, sport, and track, that are electronically controlled by valves at the rear chambered mufflers. Basically, in quiet mode, the valve is closed and exhaust gases have to filter their way through the muffler and its chambers and out the outer tips. In track mode, the valve is all the way open and exhaust gases have a straight shot through the inner exhaust tips. In normal and sport, the valves are partially open, and so that controls the tone and the volume at various cruising speeds. Because it turns out, regardless of mode, even in quiet mode, the valves will open all the way at wide open throttle. This helps protect the motor, and it will give you full power in any mode. Turns out, this stock S650 active valve exhaust system might just be the loudest and freest flowing OEM Mustang exhaust ever. It's kind of maxed out. Although it's unclear if this is a direct result of the 4th generation Coyote and its tune, this revised exhaust system versus the previous generation, or a combination. And yet, despite all of the improvements, the factory setup has a few major flaws. First, there is no factory H or X pipe crossover inside the resonator. Yes, there is a crossover chamber as well as 2 resonated chambers for each bank of cylinders. But in terms of airflow, the OEM system isn't optimized for scavenging, which affects both performance and sound. Second, it's a 2.5-inch exhaust system that sees a choke point right after the resonator. And third, look at all these sharp 90-degree bends just before the mufflers that are slowing down and interrupting good airflow. That's where Magnaflow comes in with their new systems that push both base and active valve Mustang GTs up to roughly 498 peak horsepower at the crank, almost dark horse power levels, all of this without a tune or a check engine light coming on.
The one thing we've definitely found about the S650 is that the tune feels like it's more accepting of modification. In our previous generations, going to a 3-inch tubing didn't really provide increased results until we had like a aftermarket header or aftermarket calibration. With this particular exhaust, we went into it thinking, hey, we're going to do the same thing. Started with 2.5, and we did 3 just to make sure, and we were pleasantly surprised when we found a peak difference of almost 12 horsepower. But there's places under the curve we're seeing power gains of anywhere between 13, 14, but the part you feel is from 2,500 up to the mid-range where we see about 5,000 RPM, we're seeing almost 20 foot-pounds of torque, and that's something that the butt dyno will even pick up.
Also worth noting, all of Magnaflow's dyno testing was done with 91 octane gas from California, so you may see more improvements with higher octane gases from other places in the country. How'd they do it? Airflow optimization. First, Magnaflow increased system diameter to a full 3 inches all the way back, straight through, no interruptions. Second, they used computer-designed mandrel bends to reduce hard angles and improve flow. This not only improves stock numbers, but Magnaflow says you can add boost without worrying that this exhaust is going to be too restrictive later on. Also, Magnaflow decided to go with an H-pipe design over the X-pipe from the S550 era, and of course, the H-pipe produces a more signature deep and mellow tone that is more characteristic of the Magnaflow sound. Systems and pricing. First, for the base GT, there's a dual-tip competition exhaust for $2,499. This catback system features an H-pipe and mandrel-bent 3-inch stainless piping, as well as straight-through mufflers, noise-canceling no-drone technology chambers, and 4.5-inch black chrome tips. The result here is something that sounds more akin to Corsa, Roush, or Borla. And because the dual-tip system from factory is more restrictive than the active valve exhaust, you should expect to see upwards of 18 peak horsepower gains with this particular system. For active valve Mustang GTs, Magnaflow actually offers two quad-tip systems. Now, interestingly enough, these are only going to get you an additional 12 peak horsepower, but that's because the active valve system on the Mustang GT from factory is already less restrictive. Basically, the systems are equally as good no matter what you're putting on, and the total gains are going to be 18 from the base and 12 from the active valve, again pushing you up to about 498 peak horsepower at the crank. The quad-tip competition system also features an H-pipe as well as 3-inch mandrel bent tubing, but swaps in chambered rear mufflers that feature the exact same valve as the OEM system while offering a lot more flow in quiet and normal modes. This will set you back $3,399 and add much deeper tones than the dual tip system. Magnaflow went out of their way to purchase these valves from the same company that makes them for Ford. They did this because the active valve system is actually very sensitive, so using OEM componentry prevents throwing a check engine light. Next, we have the quad-tip X-Mod exhaust, which is the one that we did most of our testing on for this review. And at first glance, it looks almost identical to the quad-tip competition exhaust. The difference is that Magnaflow adds higher-end V-band clamps, they add structural bracing to keep the tips even, and there's also the option to swap between the Extreme Delete H-pipe or a resonated H-pipe, which of course lowers the volume just a touch more and produces even more mellow tones. At $4,599, you might be wondering why it's more expensive to go quieter, or why anybody would want to go quieter, and I have to admit, I kind of agree, this is a lot of money. But Magnaflow says that the X-Mod costs more because of the additional high-end materials that are being used, and of course the flexibility within a few minutes of wrenching to swap out between the H-pipe and the resonated H-pipe.
Now, one of the nice things are, we know a lot of guys out there are going to be doing long tube headers and such. If you do want to have something that is going to be able to control that extra noise created by the header, this option becomes a really cool thing to have if you have a neighborhood where you don't want to wake up all the neighbors, or if when you're driving not on the track, you have the 10 minutes to spare to swap this out when you're underneath the vehicle.
Because this resonator, unlike the factory resonator, doesn't restrict airflow at all.
You can see here's the crossover section, which was an open chamber and some ports. On our system, we're putting an H-pipe into the system, which is a very big deviation from our traditional X-pipe mentality. One of the things that we found was that there was no difference in power on this motor due to the tuning, and with that, we wanted to make sure that we incorporated enough perf core here so that we could do something similar to what the factory did, except for the fact that we are doing it with a larger capacity muffler so that we can flow more air and keep a more continuous airflow.
For those who don't want a full catback system, Magnaflow also has a 2.5-inch resonator delete H-pipe for $599, which of course is going to give you a little bit more volume and a little deeper tone. I did not get to test it for this particular review though, so I haven't heard it. Lastly, for Dark Horse owners, it's worth noting that your OEM exhaust is almost identical to the active valve GT system. But because your rear valance was revised to integrate the rear diff cooler, Ford actually repositioned your tips a little bit lower. So Magnaflow actually hasn't decided if they're going to make a Dark Horse system, but they have designed one. I actually got to drive it on the Anderson Composites Mustang Dark Horse. I was the first one to do so. But if it comes to market, it's going to be actually even more expensive because it's going to come with standard carbon fiber tips. So we'll see how that goes. First impressions, I've driven many different combinations today. I drove a stock Mustang GT with the active valve exhaust. So I'm very familiar with that. It's loud, not as loud as this, but it's loud and it's got kind of a almost a rasp to it. That's stock, right? You put on the X-Mod with the resonator, and there is a lot more bass, a lot more volume, great tone, a lot better than factory. Like, it is drony, though there is some compromise with going with this system. So, you know, the stock system has absolutely no drone. You step up to the X-Mod, there's gonna be a touch of drone, especially when you're in sport, in track modes, and you're kind of lugging the car in those highway cruising gears. Stepping up here to the H-pipe is absolutely glorious. Deep tone mixed with the high tones. There's no resonator at all. It's just chambered mufflers. It's a little bit too drony for my tastes. Like, I'm sensitive to deep bassy tones in cars. I would not want to, oh yeah, hear that? That's like just before 2 grand, like 1900, 2 grand. But as I found here, if you're in normal mode or in quiet mode, there's a little bit of rumble, but here in quiet mode, that's no drone at all. I'm really digging that as an option. So you could cruise this on the highway in that 1,000 to 2,000 range where it really likes to drone. But in terms of the way this thing sounds from the outside and when it's revving, it sounds a lot better than factory. And I think a lot of people are going to be happy. And of course, there's the performance gains. You can feel it when this system is on. I drove it, the GT back to back, and that extra 20 foot-pounds of torque, you know, in that 2,500 to 4 grand range is totally noticeable. Could I feel the 12 horsepower up top? I mean, I'm kind of in an industrial area today, so I didn't really do any like drag racing or really big pulls. So I can't say I felt the horsepower, but stoplight to stoplight, the power is there, the tone is there. Now, for the competition I absolutely loved. It is super loud. It's like driving around in track mode all the time. But because of the no drone technology in the back, because it doesn't have a resonator, there's no added sense of no lower tones or mid-tones get put into the system. So it's all upper tones. It sounds like a race car, right? If you like that sound, like if that's your jam, like you're gonna love the competition system. Again, that's for the base GT with no active valves, and there's no drone, so there's no resonance. You can literally drive around. It's loud. You might get a ticket in some places. But you can drive around without any kind of warbling or weird sensation, and it's really cool. Like, I think people are going to be surprised that Magnaflow built a system like that, and I hope they sell a lot of them to the base GT folks because it's really, really good. Wrapping things up, you guys, huge thanks to Magnaflow for having me down here. Definitely check out this, listen to the sound clip, see if you like that tone. It's louder than factory, it's deeper and more mid-tone than factory, which I like. Going back to the factory, I was like, oh, it's kind of disappointing. Like, I was missing all the Magnaflow to it. And for base GT guys, if you want that extreme sound, that the competition exhaust, it's going to give you the same horsepower gains as this X-Mod system in track mode. And it sounds awesome, but that's my honest opinion, and that's all I can really offer. Cheers. As we dive into these clips, please keep in mind that they better represent tonal changes and variances rather than volume for basically 2 reasons. First, the automatic gain on the microphone we used, it equalized levels. And second, as previously mentioned, the active valve system is designed to open up when the accelerator approaches wide open throttle. And so even in the quieter modes, they're gonna sound pretty similar, but still, here are the exhaust clips. We're gonna do exterior and then interior driving. Funny enough, I'm in Anderson Composites Mustang Dark Horse that doesn't have a hood, but it's got the same extreme H-pipe resonator delete and the X-Mod system on there, so it sounds very similar to the GT that I was testing out early today, and I'm gonna kind of run through a few sound clips. I'm in quiet mode, and this is what it's like driving around here. Oh man, this Dark Horse is legit, you guys. These Trofeo RS tires are the bomb. All right, pulling out here in normal mode. Sorry for the light, guys. It's gonna be kind of all over the place. So this is here's a pull in normal. Oh, Tremec. Sport. Yeah, I think the way Magnaflow is explaining it to me, I think sport mode starts off like normal, but opens up just a touch more. It's not, to my ears, it's not wholeheartedly louder. Yeah, it's really interesting. Once you get past $2,000 and you're really leaning into it, this thing is glorious. Wow. Okay, I'm gonna put it into a high gear, get it into kind of the drone zone. There's a little bit of rumble, but here in quiet mode, that's no drone at all. I'm really digging that as an option, so you could cruise this on the highway in that 1,000 to 2,000 range where it really likes to drone. Sorry, 6 gear, not grand. So, also very livable. There's a touch more of the lower frequencies. Really get, yeah, so testing it out versus normal. Oh yeah, there's a touch extra bass when you're in sport mode and driving in the drone zone of that $1,000 to 2. There's track mode, so the valve is all the way open now. Yeah, really, really loud on the drone here. I would not want to, oh yeah, hear that? That's like just before $2,000, like 1,900, $2,000. Let's see if I can get down here. Yeah, I would not personally drive around in this setup at that rev range, but here, let